we didn't really have a lot of kratom use up north or abuse up north until about 4 years ago. How about you guys here? Heard of it? Yeah. Okay, just kind of flying under the radar though. Yeah. Where are you guys mainly seeing kratom? Gas stations. Where else? Convenience stores. Smoke shops. That's when it really got our attention, and we saw quite a bit of use coming out of smoke shops. Now we're seeing it even in like grocery stores, chain grocery stores. And so we're trying to figure out what's going on, and so I really started to investigate what we had going on up north. And then at the state level, we started doing presentations with our community service troopers, and then when we do team programs, we have a lot of different school resource officers throughout the state, and they were having the same problem, the same issue. And so it really started to pick up the last couple months. So of our community service troopers, we have somebody throughout the state that does what Don and I do. Today, a couple of things that we're going to try to do. Kind of get a grip on what kratom is and how we see it and what are the legal ramifications and what do we need to think about and consider. First, kratom is a plant. Kratom is from the Mitra genus species. It's a stimulant like coffee. And so what we've found is, and we'll get into the drying process, but the drying process affects how the plant itself works. And it's really interesting. It's super interesting. When we see it dried, it can be put into capsulated form. It can also be pressed into a pill form. But most commonly, despite what we see in head shops and smoke shops, it's a powder. And so we see a lot of people, especially if they're trying to regulate or mitigate pain, they may be using kratom to try to be that middle ground between a high-dose Tylenol and then an opiate-based painkiller. And so that's what people are trying to do naturally with it, usually if they're doing it from the powder form. Again, we can see it in a lot of things. Some people will use it in teas, right, because it's already dried. So they'll add water and use it like a kratom tea. We also see it in a lot of different created forms, right, manufactured forms, whether it's drinkable, edible, or not. Again, low doses, people like to use it as a stimulant. In the head shops, the smoke shops, with that 16 to 22-year-old experimenting group, they like to use it as a stimulant. So it's usually going to be a very young, immature part of the plant, probably less than a year and a half, 2 years of growth, and they're going to try to extract and create kratom powder from a younger type of tree, and the drying process is going to change a little bit. If we're actually seeing someone trying to use it in higher doses, it's usually going to be more mature type tree. They're going to allow it to usually grow in darker conditions or maybe even completely dark conditions, and it's going to have more of the sedative effect that we see with the opiate-based painkillers. And so that's kind of that urban legend that we've all heard, right? That people are trying to use this because it uses the receptors in the same way that opiates do, that it can help cure that crave from opiates, and people are trying to wean themselves off of addiction. But again, like the doctor stated, very simply, right? There's no data. The FDA doesn't use that in that capacity as a dietary supplement. Dietary supplements are just simply that. Dietary supplements are not supposed to be used to mitigate pain or to be used in any long-term study. So how do they get this into clinical studies? Great question. Great question. And so that's part of what we see in the community. This plant can be used in various different reasons or methods, and we only know about the 1.2% that we're actually trying to use it in a manner that would be consistent with either trying to use it to mitigate pain or to wean themselves off of addiction to an opiate-based painkiller. So what do we see? There's a couple different strains. White vein kratom is an older, more mature plant, and it's dried with no light in the first process where you have a climate-controlled room and you let the plant itself dry. And then when you continue the drying process, it's continued to be in dark and indoors. Once we use these different strains, there's a combination of how they do that. If they introduce light either early, if it's UV light, or if it's actual sunlight, and that will change how the plant, when it dries, how much mitragenine it actually collects in it. And so that's what's going to give, the drying process is what gives this plant its different intensities. And so it's different. The problem is there's not standardization into how you do the drying process. And so if you go to a smoke shop and you ask for kratom, you have no idea what type of drying process they've used. In the powder form, you do start to see, it's kind of like going to a dispensary now, and you have to kind of trust your bud tender as to what strain of indica sativa you have, so they can tell you how it's going to affect you. If you trust your bud tender and you understand a little bit about that process, they're trying to help you with the CBD portions of the plant in marijuana to try to do that. Very similar with the powdered aspect of kratom. However, in bottle form, in food form, I don't think that we're getting those standardizations and that consistency in the drying process, which is going to completely change a plant. And so that's what we see. Again, white vein kratom, because it's harvested in the early stages, it's a very immature plant. It's going to have the highest mitragenine concentration of any strain. And so that's going to be that pick-me-up, that almost like a stimulant type, high-powered stimulant. As we get into the green and the red vein, we're going to change the different propensities of the plant, whether it's going to give that more sedative effect or not. And the longer that we allow that plant to grow, and once we start to introduce light to the drying process, that's when you're going to see the other things where it's a more sedative type pain relief in the plant. And so consistently, that's what we see.
So if you walk into a smoke shop,
yep.
Can you say I want this particular strain?
Maybe. The problem is if you go into a smoke shop and they don't have any personal ideations or usages of this plant, they may hand you a packet and say, good luck to you. You know, you might grow a tail. You might grow a third eye. We don't know. And so that becomes a problem. If you have somebody that's actually growing the plant themselves, they understand the drying process, you're probably going to have better results. But again, we don't know. And so, again, not long-term studies. FDA doesn't regulate it, so they don't really look at it. It's the same thing like for energy drinks, right? We know the effects of sugar and caffeine. We don't know the long-term effects of guarine and taurine. Why? Because the FDA doesn't test that. That is a dietary supplement. The only time the FDA did touch energy drinks is when alcohol was in the mix with Four Loko and stuff like that. Other than that, they have not said anything about 5-Hour Energy, Monster, etc., and I don't know that they will. So, again, and a lot of it is resources. They don't have the time or the energy. Pun intended. Yeah. So what do we see with kratom? We're going to see basically the same effects, just like the doctor said on that panel. They're going to see the same effects of a lower, opiate-based painkiller, almost like what you see with heroin or an opiate-based painkiller. So you're going to see the dry mouth, the seizures, the hallucinations. You're going to see all that stuff. Is kratom addictive? Absolutely it is. It's going to be very, very similar to what we see, you know, how they're screening it. Is it legal? Yes, it is. Places that want to sell kratom have to get right now it's all regulated through LARA. They have to pay $100 to get a kratom license, and then LARA allows them to sell kratom. That's the only requirement. I've asked our tobacco tax, marijuana task force. They do some of the inspections at cigarette or tobacco shops, golf courses to see if cigars are being paid tax to, and then the marijuana shops. And what they've said is they have done nothing with kratom specifically. Lara has never asked them to continue into that arena, And so they haven't touched that yet at all. And I don't know that they will. Again, when we're working with addiction, the doctors in a different clip go a little bit further. And what they do is, if they have someone that is addicted to Kratom, they treat it like it's an opiate, and they go right to the DSM and treat it the same way when they're dealing with addiction to opiates. So that's telling you the addictive properties of this and how they're treating it in addiction facilities. So it is not a caffeine, it's not a nicotine, it's a very high-powered stimulant. Kind of a fuzzy slide. Different things to know about Kratom. Yes, it does affect your brain. Yes, it is addictive. It does have side effects. It is unregulated, and it's important that people know that. And again, this comes right from SAMHSA. If you guys are in the substance use arena and you work with people, so let them know that SAMHSA has different handouts and information on Kratom. Again, signs and symptoms of withdrawal. Very, very similar to what you're going to see dealing with a stimulant. You're going to have those mood swings, the appetite suppressant. You're going to have the sleep distribution. You might even have muscle spasms, anxiety, the craving for that substance, and all the other things that we see with addiction. So it's not uncommon to see withdrawals. Deaths from Kratom, and again, this is where that American Kratom Association and the doctors kind of differ. Have there been defined deaths from Kratom? It's kind of a mixed bag, but the CDC identified 1,150 fatal drug overdoses with Kratom or mitragenine as a full or partial contributor. So it has been identified as something that you can overdose from, but it doesn't define how many are full or partial contributors. Again, is it legal? In the United States, it's kind of a mixed bag. 9 states right now outlaw Kratom completely, and about 6 or 7 allow it to be used with some sort of licensing. There's several states, though, or countries where this originates from in Southeast Asia, where they say it's illegal. So Thailand, Australia, Malaysia, several European Union countries, they do not allow Kratom. And so having that been grown in their climate, do they know a little bit more about this and its properties than we do? And so that might be something to consider too. Again, states where it's completely banned: Alabama, Arkansas, Indiana, Rhode Island, Vermont, Wisconsin. Other states have restrictions, and Michigan was added to that list in 2024. So there are probably about 27 states where it's completely legal and not regulated at all.
I have a question.
Yep.
You had mentioned that Laura has not asked them to look into regulations and following it. How do we make that happen? How do we make them say?
Just like we have with everything else, right? The donkeys and the elephants, when they're in the room, believe it or not, 83% of the time, they really work well together. And so we don't give them a lot of credit. You remember bath salts? Mm-hmm. K2, Spice? They got together really, really quickly and came up with a conclusion because it affected, especially when it affects kids and public health. They're going to really take a notice. So we really have to get behind the fact that we're seeing this as an issue and a problem, and having the substance-free youth coalitions, having them define this as a problem in their community, I think that would give it a lot more legs. So, in your community, if they're seeing an uptick, they're reporting it, you're going to start to see that getting reported then on what's the test that they take in 7th, 9th, 11th grade? Yeah, MyFi. So, hopefully they'll ask, specifically on a MyFi to get that question on there, and then they can define if Kratom is one of those things in the community that's being abused.
The other thing I'll add is,
Yeah.
Lieutenant Jarrett was supposed to speak today. He does our Monroe Area Narcotics Investigation Team, and he's actually on a search warrant right now. So he did let me know, though, that Toledo City Council banned the sale of synthetic Kratom products just on November 5th, so a couple days ago. So
Yeah.
it allows, like it's going to ban within Toledo city limits, which is right across the state line for us. So
Yeah.
that's, something that we can put in our pocket too if we try to do some advocacy with our legislators.
Yeah, look at neighboring states. Look, because these trends, we've seen it with meth, right? We see that our neighboring states and in certain pockets, once these trends start to pop up, we're going to see it all over the place. You know, it's not like before where you'd watch Friday night videos and then 3 months later it would hit a shopping mall near you. Kids, because of the way that they access social media, if it's popular one place, it's going to hit. And it's probably going to be a TikTok challenge, right? So it's going to be one of those things, once we see it, it's going to flourish again. And that's kind of what we had with the products. A lot of people have only seen it in foil packs, maybe in a powder form, but there's a whole bunch of different Kratom products that are out there. Kratom in energy drinks, right? And if we're not reading the labels on those energy drinks, again, the FDA doesn't regulate these things, so you have to pay attention to what you're consuming. We also see it quite a bit in a tea form. And so it's an herbal supplement. It's a natural product. It comes from, you know, nature. And so we see a lot of that labeling and marketing too. Yeah.
So there's a lot of tea shops. I'm not a tea drinker, but I hear there's a lot of tea shops around. Is there anything that says that any of those teas could have this or not have this? Is there any way they have to notify people?
I think as long as they're paying the licensing, Lara probably is accepting of what they do. It doesn't say that it has to be bottled and pre-made. Can you take your own powder and make tea in your own tea shop? I don't know the answer to that, but I would bet.
How it could be a flow of
Yeah. Very, very similar to when we saw the legalization of marijuanas and hookahs, right? So the real quick way that we saw people grouping up was hookah lounges. And so it could be similar. I don't know the answer to that.
because it would
So-
bring people back.
It
Because if it's
absolutely would.
regulations, they need to go get their
Yeah.
teas. I just-
I think you just gave us a reason to have a field trip.
Yeah, and there you go.
And those are
Yeah.
popular amongst the teens.
Yeah.
There's teas because they're considered teas.
Yeah,
Like, what are you drinking?
like the
You know?
boba drinks and yeah.
A lot of different varieties from what I understand.
But a
Yeah.
packaged tea would have to have it on the label as an ingredient.
Correct. And I'll get to that here shortly. A lot of this stuff
Real
in.
quick, so can you go to the Lara website? And is there, I guess,
No.
assessments?
Not that I could find. So
Yeah.
I know where you're going with this, right? Lara used to have the websites. If you had, if you were a seller of alcohol, if you were a bar, you could go on those certain sites and figure out who was a licensed facility. If they had a problem or an issue, they had license information there. If they were subject to a search and they failed a test or something like that, that was all there. I haven't seen that for Kratom. I haven't seen it for marijuana yet either. Just saying. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, 'cause we can do a liquor inspection.
Our local places may not have the license then to sell it, right? I mean, we can't confirm that by just going to that website.
No, and I'm going to give you an example. So again, here we see K-Shot or Crave, which is another label that we see when we're talking about Kratom. Crave usually, for some reason, is that word that they love to use as an adjective to describe what's going on. Sometimes it will say Kratom Energy Shot. Again, Jermaine Galloway, one of the things that I ripped from his website, because we are seeing this in Harbor Springs at the IGA or the Harbor Springs Market.
That's how you got to be here.
Feel Free is what this is, and we saw it going off the shelf like crazy. Harbor Springs Market did not have a license. They didn't know. Why? Because in the labeling, they saw kava root and leaf kratom. So they saw kava, they didn't think anything about this kratom and regulation. They couldn't figure out why that was flying off the shelf. They had no clue. And so a former police officer notified me and said, hey, I picked up a couple extra hours and this stuff is flying off the shelf and it's quacking like a duck, it's waddling like a duck, and I don't get it, but what's going on? And so we kind of figured it out. Then I went back and saw from an old Jermaine Galloway thing, about 5 years ago they had Feel Free as a specific product, and a lot of people missed it because kava was the first thing that was listed there, not the kratom. And so kava is one of those things. And before we leave, I'm going to toss out salvia and rue seed. And so that's the other two things that we're actually starting to see pop up north. But again, we see it in different ways. So the Feel Free isn't the only one. Different flavors. And again, it's kava and kratom. So if we're reading the labels and getting deeper into the contents, we're able to see that kratom is definitely involved.
Corey, can I stop you again?
Yep.
I've got people letting me know that they need to be let in the waiting room.
Oh boy.
Sorry.
Yeah, I can't get out and get back in, so
Okay,
I'll get to them quick.
okay.
So, and then this is all I got left, I think, 1 or 2 slides. Precautions to consider, I think we've already, kind of beat this up pretty good. But again, kratom is not lawfully marketed in the U.S. as a drug product, only as a dietary supplement, and it shouldn't be used as a food additive in conventional foods or anything like that. We don't have long-term studies. We don't know what the effects of this thing is. And one of the other things that was kind of really stood up is that the NSDUH called this a regional phenomenon and a white middle class phenomenon. Because when they look at who they're seeing in recovery centers trying this product, that was what they saw.